How do we adequately prepare for the unexpected responsibilities that come with caring for an aging loved one? As life expectancy continues to increase, an overwhelming number of us find ourselves in a caregiver role, often unequipped and unsure about the complexities ahead. To guide us, we're joined today by Star Bradbury, an esteemed aging life care specialist, CEO of Senior Living Strategies, and the insightful author of Successfully Navigating Your Parents' Years, critical information to maximize their independence and make sure they get the care they need. With 25 years under her belt, Star has championed the cause of thousands of families, aiding them in making informed decisions about senior care. In today's episode, we discuss how to ensure the independence of our aging parents, the pivotal medical, legal, and financial knowledge required for their care, managing long-distance caregiving, and even how to discern when it's time for extra assistance. We talk about the nuances of senior living options, navigating the world of advanced directives, and exploring strategies to manage the financial aspects of our parents' future. Star shares tips on how caregivers can safeguard their own mental, physical, and emotional well-being in the midst of these responsibilities. This insightful conversation promises to be both informative and empowering. Here is my interview with Star Bradbury. Star, we've just had so much fun actually chatting and getting to know each other before I hit record, but now we get to have a conversation for everyone else to observe and learn from you. Thank you for joining me. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel the same way. I think we share the same passion, and that shows through what you're doing in your wonderful podcasts and the entire reason I wrote the book. So we've got a lot in common. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. We really do. We were just saying the word navigating that we both chose. You wrote the book, Successfully Navigating Your Parents' Senior Years, critical information to maximize their independence and make sure they get the care that they need. And the title of my podcast is Navigating the World with Your Aging Loved One. So we're kindred spirits. And we were just saying that word just perfectly describes everything that goes into this season of life.
Well, it does. And when I thought so seriously, and for the years it took me to finally finish this book, what did I want to call it? What did I want to title it? I just kept coming back to that. And really, that was the original title, except that I added the adjective successfully navigating, because really, and you can relate to this, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Anyone can navigate, and that could be good or bad experience. And I was compelled to write the book to help families, whether you're a senior or you're an adult child, or maybe it's not even your parents. I debated about using that word. Could be an aunt, an uncle, grandparents.
Yeah.
A loved one, you're in a caregiving role. You want to successfully navigate. And that's difficult to do. It is a tremendous challenge.
It is. And you had not only personal, but then professional experience with this world and your parents, right?
True.
Tell us more about how that really shaped your perspective on that.
In fact, I gave a presentation last night, and I was telling the attendees, my audience, if you will, I was saying my personal experience shaped what the information that I wanted to share, Nicole, because I looked back on decisions I made or support that I didn't know I could give, or information I absolutely didn't have. And when you don't have information, then you're making decisions that are uneducated or ill-informed because you don't even know what your options are. And when I looked back at my own experience, so my parents divorced when I was pretty young. So I had two sets of parents. My dad and my stepmom lived in New York City. And I like to joke, although it's not funny, but I do think you need to keep a sense of humor. Don't grow old in New York City unless you have lots of resources. And then my mom and stepdad lived in Fort Lauderdale, 6 hours away from me. I live in northern Florida. So I got to see my own family make decisions and how they did and mostly didn't work. And looking back, after I gained 25 years experience in senior living, and I ran assisted living and memory care and worked in life care, I thought, I just have to write this book to help people learn what their options might be, what decisions they could make. And really, gosh, if you said my primary motivator is to encourage people to plan ahead and understand how much difference it makes if you can develop a plan together with your parents long before any crisis, years before you're in the overwhelm state.
Yeah, it's massive. And the responsibility, we're called to that because I think when we plan ahead, we feel empowered when we have information and resource that we can make the best decisions for ourselves. And absolutely, like you said, we don't make those sound decisions when we're in crisis or overwhelmed. We're having to make them, off the cuff with the little information that we might have, just so the importance of the having the plan and having the conversation. And I am looking forward to having you tell us how we do that based on your experience, based on all the knowledge that you have. We both come from a place of wanting to inform people. We want them to feel equipped with information and have educated decision-making opportunities ahead of them.
Well, what I hear when I sit down with families, and sometimes in a perfect world, I meet with the parents and their adult kids. That might not be the first meeting, but it might extend as we have further meetings. And what I encourage families to do, if you're in the adult child role, you're not going to go in and tell your parents what to do, especially if they're in what I call, and in my book, I refer to sort of this, let's just call it post-retirement phase, where you have the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. That is a pretty quick summation, of a long span of time. Yeah. I mean, let's face it, that could be even 30 or 40 years, depending on when your parents might want to retire. Right. But the time, Nicole, to really talk to your parents is when this is years in advance. Maybe people say, well, when, Star? When? I mean, give me an age. And I like to say, honestly, my opinion is that you sit down and talk to your parents when they're in their mid-60s. Maybe they haven't even retired. Earlier, if you know they're going to retire. Because what you're trying to do is, first and foremost, establish communication with them about this topic, meaning that the first questions you might ask are absolutely initially very soft, meaning, Mom, Dad, what are you thinking about retiring? Are you gonna stay where you are? Or are you thinking about moving to Florida? I certainly am familiar with the move to Florida concept, although I've been here many, many years. I didn't move here to retire. And have the most generic conversations. Now, people say, why so generic? Because if you don't establish a pattern of asking questions, listening, and then helping your parents develop a realistic plan that is in line with what you see might be their future, and you're just trying to start these conversations after they're in the hospital, after they fell and broke their hip, and that is not the time to have that conversation. Right. In a perfect world, you would sit down with them way early, Nicole, and say, what are your plans to retire? Are you thinking about staying in your house, which is called aging in place? Well, then the question is, do they live on 20 acres in the middle of nowhere, an hour from a hospital with 3 sets of stairs? I'm exaggerating a little, but these are all the things I've seen. But you can pile them. And all the bathrooms are upstairs, no full bathrooms, no bedrooms downstairs. So, I mean, it's sort of a practical approach to begin with, so that you're working together as a team, helping develop a plan. Maybe your parents are afraid to even talk to you about it.
They could think, maybe I don't want to worry my children, so we're not going to go there, but yet it's so important.
I don't want to burden my children. Yeah. But if you open the door and say, no, I'm willing to talk to you, I would rather know, Mom, Dad, what your wishes are and what you think you might want to do, or at least talk it out. For example, I had a a couple who brought this subject up.
Mm.
As I like to say, no one gets to claim the right to initiate that conversation.
Right.
For anybody, it could be the adult kids or it could be the parents.
Mhm.
And what I tell people is get my book, read it yourself, buy a copy for all your kids, ask them to read it and ask them, hey, tell me when you finished the book. It might take 6 months if they're super busy, really, right?
Mhm.
And then let's have a conversation. Zoom made all of that possible. It could be spread out across the country and you could still have a Zoom conversation saying, I would like to talk about it. Maybe I should move closer to you. Maybe I could build a tiny house on your 10 acres and have my own place, but be nearby.
Yeah.
Next time I come, would you do some research on retirement communities in your area? And let's go look at them together years before you're making any decisions under duress.
Right. Well, and those years of planning give us time to prepare, which I know you also talk about all the other pieces of that, which is documentation and finances. And, and that all does take time to put in place or to have conversation or think through. But real quick, I want to go back to because you define go, go, slow go, and no go years. How do you define those? What does that mean when you say those terms?
That's a great question. And I think everyone will relate to what I'm about to say. So when when parents or your loved ones are newly retired, they're in the go-go phase. Meaning, I've had so many people say, I can't even keep up with my parents. They're always traveling, they're on the go, or my dad golfs 5 days a week, my mom's playing tennis. They're in great health. I have nothing to worry about. Dot, dot, dot.
Right.
Okay.
Hmm.
They're doing great. And that phase, there's no age in which you graduate out of the go-go years. I've seen people in their 80s in the go-go years. I have a friend who's 94 who could probably work me under the table.
Mm.
So there's no assigning. I mean, you've met people who are 60 and you might have thought they were 80, and
Yeah.
you've met people who are 80. So we can't assign an age, but we can say this is a phase. And I would say don't think that the biggest mistake people say, well, what do you think is the biggest mistake adult kids make? Here it is, Nicole. Thinking that phase will last forever.
Yeah. So true.
Because when you're in your 80s, yes, you can be in the go-go years and it can change overnight.
Yeah.
And so what I say in my book, it is not if your parents will need help. It is when your parents will need help. And so if you're ready, and that I'm not saying this is easy because nobody wants to think about their parents transitioning into the slow go years. The
Mm.
slow go years I define as you're slowing down as an aging person. You're saying, I just don't think we really want to or can travel anymore. We're staying closer to home. Why? Maybe they're starting to experience some health issues. They want to be closer to their doctors, to their home. They're getting comfortable um, in a more uh, in a more stable environment, and they're not on the go all the time. That doesn't mean that they're not connected to their community or to the family. They're just not on that. I am retired and I have my bucket list and I'm doing everything
All the
on it.
things.
But slow go, something's happened. It could be what I call the inevitable curveball. Something happens and and maybe it's to one of you if you're a couple. It could be your partner, it could be your spouse. Something happens and now your world is rocked. How
Mhm.
often have you seen that? A
It's
lot.
that event. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then there's the no-go years. Again, the no-go years means your world has shrunk. It is far more limited.
Mhm.
Why? Maybe you're a frailer senior who's less able to drive. Your mobility, your balance is a concern. You might be in those no-go years needing home care or
Mhm.
trying to plan ahead because you're thinking, if you're realistic, that staying, and if you're asking for the red flags for your parents, you see them getting less engaged in life. They're not going out to have lunch with their friends. Maybe they're not going to their place of worship. Maybe they're saying, I just don't feel like it. You're starting to see some of the red flags I talk about in the book that would cause you to be concerned that now is the time to talk about getting some help in the home, maybe moving to a community that's supportive. I'm a big fan of a
Mhm.
supportive full service retirement community,
I
not letting that person slowly shrink, waiting for the crisis, the fall. Don't wait. And you know what? If you implement the developing a plan approach, you already kind of have talked and have an idea about what plan A and B is going to be, should that happen. And as I say, there's no rule that says you can't go from go-go to no-go and skip slow-go altogether.
Yeah.
Massive stroke, a terrible diagnosis, a fall. Everything I'm telling you in your world, am I leaving anything out? Is there something you feel that you want to add to this sort of looking at it through the lens of go, slow go, no go?
What I appreciate is that you talk about not assigning an age to it. And I think, previously everyone would talk about, young, old, 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 right, in our gerontology lingo, but it's not, and those would be years assigned to it. But when you have enough interaction and you life experience, you understand that you're right. You could have someone that is much, years older, but has the energy and the ability and the physical stamina to be on the go all the time.
Correct.
And someone that,
Still out playing pickleball.
right, exactly. Exactly. So I really love that distinction of not assigning an age or for us to have preconceived opinions or assumptions based on a number when it really is about defining that stage of life. And you are so correct when you talk about it can be in one moment that everything can change. And so, just how important it is that when we think everything is great and our parents are busy and doing so many things, that really is the time because we don't know when that event or crisis might happen, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to myself, don't minimize the need to sit down and talk with your parents because they're in such great shape.
Right.
Because I've just seen in all my experience of really honestly helping thousands of families how fast things can change. And the adult kids are in shock. But my dad was doing so great.
Yeah.
But my mom she was really just so active. And I think younger people underestimate that by the time a curveball comes your way in your 80s, you often don't have the resiliency, and I mean medically,
Right.
physically, to bounce back. Now, some do. I have seen people go in, fall, break a hip, and they're like, I'm doing my PT, I'm getting out of here, I'm going back to playing tennis or whatever. It's not like that can't happen, but I wouldn't say that's the norm.
Right.
And so if you've already talked to your parents, and I got to share this with you, I want to know if you think this is true, because it seems you would think the opposite would be true. But in my experience, Nicole, and I talk about this in the book, the older someone is, the less apt they are to have an open, free conversation with their adult kids about their plans, like what's after aging in place if that plan isn't holding up,
Yeah.
or what kind of lifestyle do you want if you've lost your spouse and you're isolated and lonely, would you consider a retirement community? So much easier to talk about this before anything like that has happened.
Yeah.
And it helps your parents kind of start to think things through. Maybe they're the reluctant ones. they're the ones who don't want to talk about it. And you can gently, I have all kinds of conversation guides depending on, are your parents bringing this up? Are you bringing it up to reluctant parents who say, we're fine. Why are you bringing this up? Here's the answer to that, by the way. Why are you bringing this up? Did I do something? Are you worried? And here's the perfect answer. You make it about yourself, not them. You say, I have friends who are dealing with their aging parents and they're having a really terrible time. I see that they're in crisis. And we don't know the future. You're doing this for me because you know what? Parents always want to help their kids. They love their kids. Mm-hmm. So then now the parents are like, oh, okay, you're not trying to tell us what to do, right? You're on the same page, which goes back to principle number one.
Yeah.
Principle number one in my book is sort of a foundational principle that will be a real guide across the spectrum, possibly 30 years. If your parents retire at 60 and they make it to 90, by the way, the fastest growing demographic in the United States today is 90 to 100.
Isn't that
90 to 100? I mean, people go, oh. Not everyone's happy to hear that, and I get that, right? 90 to 100. The older someone is, they go, I'm not sure I want to live to 90. And then the kids are like, my parents could live that long.
Right. You've got a lot of planning to do. Yeah.
Well, but you do. And so that's why one plan is not going to fit all. Yeah. Absolutely. Age of your parents, stage of your parents, health of your parents, financial. One of the pillars I talk about is, how are you going to pay for long-term care?
Oh, huge.
And boy, that conversation has to happen super early.
It really does.
You don't want to be wondering how you're paying for private home care or skilled care. The average cost, Nicole, for a semi-private room in skilled nursing care, that's long-term care, not rehab, in the United States today is like $7,800 a month, somewhere in there. That's average.
Average, yeah. Memory care is higher.
Well, that's true.
10,000 maybe.
A private room in skilled in my town here ranges from 12 to 13,000 a month. That's skilled care.
Yeah.
Assisted living. And there's a broader range, by the way. Mm-hmm. Assisted living, as you probably know, is, I would say, if you're in an inexpensive area, maybe 5,000, 6,000 a month. That's pretty average. But for memory care, just like you said, if it's an all-inclusive model, meaning everything your loved one needs is wrapped up into one monthly fee, it's closer to 8,000. But a lot of places have a lower base fee, then they do an assessment and evaluation. Now they're adding, oh, they need help with bathing, another $200 a month. Oh, they need help with managing their medication, that's another 200. Oh, they have cognitive impairment, that's another. So for any of your listeners who are educating themselves, if there's an early cognitive impairment diagnosis, go tour assisted living. Find out how it works. Educate yourself on the options.
Yeah. One section or one part of your book that I love is you have the avoiding family conflict section, which, I mean, that is where a lot of the disagreements can stem from, is we've got different schools of thought and how we want to do that. And that's just another part of starting those conversations early, is we've got many people that are possibly factoring into what those decisions are.
The biggest mistake is just, let's say you have multiple siblings, and the biggest mistake is to exclude anybody. And I really, really mean that. The difficult sister who always argues doesn't matter, because it's not going to get better. So my general advice, of course, you know your own family, you know the dynamics within your family. But my advice is to invite, if you're the parent, you invite all the children, unless there's a really, really good reason not to.
Right.
And there might be. I mean, I talk to so many people who say, sadly, my adult child has alcohol or drug issues, or something where doesn't make sense to include them. But provided that they fall into the support team category, then you want to invite and include, and again, the adult children could extend the invitation. Mom, Dad, when we're all together next Christmas, next Thanksgiving, next Hanukkah, what family reunion in the summer, could we set aside some time? I read this wonderful book. Where is my book? Successfully Navigating. See all my earmarks here.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. It's a guidebook, right? Where we reference it many times as we're
And
facing
let's
different
all read it
scenarios. Yeah.
and talk about what kind of a plan. And now, the only time that you would exclude a parent is when there's serious cognitive impairment. You could have mild cognitive impairment, MCI, and still be fully capable of having conversations with your family about what you want. You haven't progressed so far that just doesn't make sense, and it would be anxiety provoking and absolutely unproductive. But that one might be, if it's a serious cognitive impairment, all you're going to do is make mom and dad super anxious and afraid. Otherwise, you're trying to sit down and come up with just a general plan, and then keep refining that plan. That's why in the book I have that imaginary family, the Spencers, so that you can see, how do all these principles actually apply in real life, and how would a family adopt this as a guidebook and kind of move forward together with being resilient and changeable, because the curveball happens in the book. There's a curveball. We won't give up. Won't give away the plot.
Yeah, but that was very helpful because we identify with story. And so when we see story and we can walk through that, it not only embeds in our memory a little bit more, but we can also see ourselves maybe in parts of those stories. So it's just helpful as
what
we're
I do in that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And, for some of your listeners that are already in caregiving roles, and I was looking at this statistic before we got on, and I have down 1 in 5 Americans is a caregiver. That's 53 million people, 21% of the population, and 24% are caring for 2 or more people. I just
Massive amount.
I have so much compassion for those of you who are in caregiving roles and trying to cope with the stress. And I'm sure that you talk about the importance of caring for yourself, because I remind people, you're not going to be any help to your loved one if you're the one in the hospital first.
Right. And the
Give your
stats really show
schedule
that. Yeah.
on.
There's these principles you reference where it's, we can maximize and prolong our parents' independence, or we can apply the just-in-time senior planning. What are those two distinctions between those principles?
You can read the book.
Yeah.
I know you did, but it's so nice to hear people say, what are these principles?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to try to come up with something, Nicole, that people could apply and use. And because honestly, to me, a principle should be able to be applied to a variety of situations and still be useful.
Right.
Meaning, it sounds so obvious in a way. It sounds so basic, but a principle should be basic and should apply. So here's the principle number 1, in which all decisions are referenced back to this principle. How can I maximize my or my parents' independence, maximize and prolong for the longest possible time? So let's talk about that. How would you apply that? I'll use a couple of examples so your listeners can sort of say, oh, I get it. So let's say your parents say, and we kind of talked about this a little, I want to stay in my home. I'm going to stay in my home. And I always laugh and say kindly, saying that you want to stay in your home is a statement and a wish. It is not a plan. People think that just by saying, I don't think I have to do anything. I'm just going to stay in my house. I'm going to age in place. That's what that's called. But that's not necessarily a plan unless it turns out that you have everything in your house prepared.
Right.
Yeah. So if the question goes back to maximizing and prolonging your independence, and that's how you're thinking, now you're saying, if my parents stay in this house, will that maximize their independence for the longest possible time? And the answer is, it depends. Are they on 20 acres in the middle of nowhere with all their bathrooms and bedrooms upstairs? Are they already widowed or widower? Are they living alone and they're getting isolated and lonely and you're seeing that? The answer then is no.
Right.
No, probably staying in their home will not help them. Why? Look what we learned during COVID about the awful effects of isolation and loneliness.
Yeah,
It killed older people.
it did.
They
Yeah.
didn't have to be in a nursing home either.
Yeah, I was just reading the Surgeon General came out with another warning about specifically around loneliness and isolation.
Oh,
Right.
interesting. I'd love, will you send that to me?
I
I'm,
will. Such health implications. Yeah.
now let's apply this to a very different situation. Mom is diagnosed with dementia. She's living alone, or one of your parents has dementia and the caregiver just passed away, or something's happened, a curveball to them, they can no longer provide care. The kids have promised, we're never moving mom. I've heard this. We promised we would never move mom into a community. Now, that's the scenario. Let's go back to principle number one. Is allowing mom to stay in the home by herself with serious dementia while dad's in the hospital or can no longer manage care at all? Can't do it anymore. I was on a phone call with a man who's weeping. Oh my God, it broke my heart. I just can't do it anymore. So what do you do in that situation if you're thinking about the principle? Now you're asking yourself, what could I do to maximize my mom's independence for the longest possible time
Right.
in this phase of her life with dementia? It isn't leaving her alone in the house where it's not even safe anymore. Even if she's saying, but I don't want to leave my house. I don't want to leave my house. You can't let the person with dementia drive that train. They can't be the one making the decision.
Right.
Now
Right.
you become the grown up who says, Mom, I can't. Now, what are the options that will maximize that your mom's independence? Can you afford to have them move across country and live with you? Could you go live with them? That is out for so many people. Can't leave their kids, their jobs, their sustenance themselves. Okay, so now are we talking about memory care? The thing we said we'd never do. But if dad gets discharged and he comes home, he can't be the caregiver. So now you're talking about how do you maximize both of them independence and safety? Maybe it's dad comes home with some home care and mom moves to memory care, or they move to community where they're close and he's in independent living and she's getting memory care. I mean, there is no one size fits all, but now you see if you use that principle and apply it, it will help guide you. Truly, it will. Because honestly, everyone in a family is generally in agreement that the goal is to maximize mom and dad's independence for the longest possible time.
Right.
How that gets applied changes depending on the full situation and the resources available, both in terms of physical support, literal support, helping with medications or showering. So, but still, it's a guide, it's a framework. And then the just-in-time principle. There's only two principles. That's the good news.
Yeah,
They're
I
not
can
10.
remember those. Yeah.
Yeah, you can remember too. And
Remember too.
yeah, and the second is just-in-time senior planning, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but in my many years of watching people make these decisions, they burden themselves with trying to imagine the future in 10 or 15 years, especially with dementia. Don't do that. Do not do that to yourself or to your spouse or those of you involved in this caregiving planning. Try to stick with 3 to 5 year increments. Why do I say that? Because you can't predict the future, especially the older your parents are. So trying to plan for 10 or 15 years, it's a waste of time, a waste of money, a waste of resources. You're trying to come up with a plan for the next year, 2, maybe 5 years if your parents are young, still in the go-go phase, but you still want to say sort of slightly abreast of what if something happens, they're not going to be in that go-go, they're going to go to the slow-go. Am I prepared? Do I kind of know what the options might be? And where this comes from, the sort of Japanese manufacturing just-in-time inventory control thing that happened in the 1980s, they applied something called continuous improvement. Continuous improvement. You're in the
I rem
continuous
Yep.
improvement. You
Yep.
were going, oh, this isn't working.
Mhm.
We better kind of move forward with plan B, like with the Spencers. They thought they had a plan until something happened to Dad. And then they kind of did have a plan, though. At least they'd been talking and discussing, and they had to go into hyperspeed on the plan because they got that curveball.
Yeah.
So you have to be resilient. Your plan has to be flexible. God, that was a long answer.
But it was so full of rich information, which I believe is what we're looking for, right? When we've never done this before, when we are trying to figure out where do I start? How do I do that? And we also want it to be something that is attainable for us in some ways, right? There's so many caveats because every story is so unique. But with that said, having two principles, it kind of can be those like guiding pieces of direction for us. It gives us that framework as we are navigating what's next. And as you were sharing about the first, how do we maintain and support that independence? It had me thinking about the concept of reframing what we define as independence. And when I say that, I mean having the support of a senior living community or someone coming and helping us in our home. It gives us that additional, what's the term I'm looking for? It gives us the additional support as for the tasks that have to happen, right? So that we leave energy and that time in our day to do the things that bring us joy and help us be independent in other ways, if that makes sense.
It
Um,
makes me so happy to hear you say that
yeah.
because you got it. You know, have to you have to change your own mindset, and hopefully if you're a senior listening, or help your parents see that accepting help would
Mm,
actually maximize their independence
each
instead of saying, I don't need any help. You're not going to hire any, I don't want anyone coming into my home,
one.
which you may have a parent that falls into that category. That's where you say, Mom, Dad, I I want to allow you to age in place if that's what you really want. And that will work so much better and help you stay independent longer.
Right. That
If
is
you
key.
accept some help so that those things are taken off you, it'll be better for you. It's that shift, it's that click. And I've seen it when older people go, oh, so here's a great story. I have a friend who is a friend as opposed to a consulting client, and she used to say to me, I am never moving into any retirement community ever. And she knew that I worked in senior living and I knew every single community. Don't even talk to me about them, Star. I am fine. I do not need any help. And besides, when I need help, I already have a plan. I'm going to move to closer to my daughters, several hours away. So we've already talked about it. We know it's going to happen. So that was what I heard for years because we've been friends for years. And then she said, gosh, I'm having trouble. She has COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, started using oxygen at night. She's in her 90s and very, very independent. But she started seeing like, I'm having trouble getting the garbage out to the end of the driveway. It's just too hard for me. And she's not,
That's,
and
I
all of
mean, I
this
have a hard
cooking.
time
I'm
with
so
that sometimes.
tired of it. I know I'm so tired of cooking and shopping. And but she realized, and I give credit to people. And when people say, what is the key to aging gracefully or successfully? Resiliency, being willing to change your mind,
Yeah.
being what I like to call and I am a realistic optimist. Underline realistic. She came to the conclusion, I was so proud of her, that staying at home was actually, she had to put a new roof on her house. Do you want to spend what kind of money to
Right.
put a new roof on your house in your 90s? No, it was the house, the maintenance of the house, the cost of the maintenance. not being able to housekeeping, everything. She said she did exactly what she said she would never do because she recognized it would maximize her independence and prolong it.
Yeah.
And she moved to what I call a full service retirement community. All your meals, all your housekeeping, 24-hour security, home care on site if you needed it. Not a life care community, just a full service retirement community. She's happy as a clam. Now
And
she doesn't worry about the garbage,
right.
cooking, grocery shopping, and she can live her life. Exactly what you said.
Yeah. I love that you focus on that resilience and that we have permission to change our mind, right?
Absolutely.
Every day, every minute. And there is so
Don't
much
get stuck.
power acknowledging that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so important for any of us, really, at any age.
that's true. That's true.
You don't have to be 90 to be resilient.
I have a really good friend of mine who I grew up with, and we talk on the phone, multiple times a day. But she will always say, like, how are you feeling today? What's happening today? And it gives me so much freedom to share what's on my mind in that moment and not being tied to maybe what I thought or felt
Or
prior
to
to
be
that.
freedom to say, I'm really having a shitty day.
Exactly, exactly. We need to be able to do that. Yeah, the real stuff, right? And especially with older adults in our lives, I think there's a challenge sometimes. I think people have this Pollyanna view about it, or we have to just always, for instance, age gracefully or have this acceptance. And there's the difference between successful and I think graceful. And graceful is a wonderful thing. But I also think acknowledging that there's some also challenging, frustrating moments to that for
Oh,
everybody, right? And
absolutely.
being able to speak to that. Yeah.
Well, in the book, I often say, you're going to make mistakes. You
Mhm.
can't be perfect. It's okay, but putting any effort towards developing a plan or any effort in trying to educate yourself on the options is better than no plan at all or nothing. And the other thing is you're far more in control if you educate yourself ahead of a crisis in terms of making decisions. Like I have a whole chapter on long distance caregiving. Like
Mm,
if you live in one state or your parents live, any more than 3 hours away or another state, you're still able to do many things ahead of time to put yourself in a better position to help you if you get that call, in the middle of the night, which I certainly did many times.
right.
Just
Right.
transported dad to the hospital. He's in bad, bad shape.
Oh,
Father in New York City.
right. Right. And we feel
So,
like we
um,
don't have, when we're not there, we feel so
yes, yes, helpless. But
helpless.
I didn't know what I know now. That was 25 years ago. I
Right.
didn't understand what I could have done to make it easier for me to manage that crisis and much better for him.
Right.
So I have a whole list in the book of basics, like you referenced, the critical medical documents, things you wouldn't even think about beyond the basics, critical financial, legal documents, things you might not consider besides just the basics that are part of the 5 pillars I list of aging successfully. And of course, the big one is how am I going to pay?
Oh, that is a
Or
big
how
one.
are you going to pay for long-term care? And if there's anybody out there that needs prompting to have this conversation early with
Mhm.
your parents, it's that. It's that big question mark. When you look at the statistics, 70% of people over the age of 65 are going to need long-term care. And for women, let's see, I think it was 3.7 here it is, 3.7 years. And for men, this is just average,
Right.
2.2 years. Average means it could be longer.
It could be. And for dementia
And if
care
you're lucky, oh, that's
longer. Oh,
yeah.
whole
So
nother chapter in your book.
yes, it's another
Yeah.
chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. And what
So
I really valued was the question prompts because when we're having conversation, we don't know what to say or even how to
so
broach the
hard.
topic and the conversation. So having those questions laid out, I thought was so helpful. Was so
Well,
helpful.
because from my own experience, for example, I tried to have a conversation with my dad and my stepmom it really went south. I was young, wasn't as experienced. I hadn't had all these years in senior living. I was way too direct, way too abrupt. For
Mm.
example, I would never recommend that you sit down with your dad and your mom or stepmom and say, out of the blue, I'm worried about money. Or how are you going to, what happens if you, there wasn't any, like I said, habit of communication prior to that.
Aw,
That is, so please don't do that. And that's why I said, start with
yeah.
the super soft questions. What are you thinking about retiring? Are you going to stay in New York City? Do you want to move to Florida? Not with me necessarily, but closer. I mean, super. And of course, and the other thing I say, let's just back up a minute. Do not say that if you don't mean it.
Right.
You
Right.
do not get yourself into a position that you know you can't handle.
Mhm.
What if you have a same-sex partner and you already know your parents are super conservative and that living near you or nope.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to come up with other solutions, other ways you might be able to help your parents that don't involve necessarily closer or in the tiny house on your property or right next door or whatever. That doesn't mean you can't help,
Yeah.
but accept your limitations and don't feel that you have to do something that you know you. I have seen it all. I really have.
Mhm.
It's not going to work. It's going to be ugly for everybody.
Right. Right.
There's nothing wrong with saying, I can't move from Florida to Ohio. I just can't. But I can help you build your support team in Ohio. I can talk to you about what's available in your community, and together we can find the right home care.
Mhm.
It's okay to say what you can't do and set boundaries for what you are willing and can do. And don't take it on all yourself. If you have siblings, if you have a broader support team, remember, you're building your own support team to get through this and finding out about their support team, where they live, because so many
Mhm.
people live so far apart from their own parents. So here I am in Florida with a set of parents in New York City, and then my other set of parents down in Fort Lauderdale, 6 hours away.
Mhm.
We all thought my stepdad would die first.
Mhm.
He had a lot of health issues, but no, there's the curveball. Mom died first. So then it was back to the drawing board, and I helped move my stepdad to my town here. Now, I was ever grateful that he was willing. He was willing to move. And he had his own apartment in independent living. And when that didn't work, we got home care. And when that didn't work, he moved into assisted living. And when that didn't work, he moved to memory care.
Yeah.
So, flexible plan, try and see what's coming in that 3 to 5 year window.
Yes. It is. You share about how in your book we get the ball rolling, right? Then you
Yeah.
talk about the documents and what's important that we have in place. Everyone just is going to need to grab your book and read it because we could talk for hours and we probably need to come back because we have so much more to even talk about.
And then
But
I get on my bandstand and you want to say, get the hook.
no.
Somebody shut her up.
Oh, I love it. They can't see me, but I'm sitting here nodding my head the whole time, going, yes, this is so good. There's the part of, planning, what's next, planning for dementia, different things that we can educate ourselves on, the strength and the support team, planning for cost. You just referenced that, how we have those discussions, specifically end of life. I know that that's something that we inevitably will all go through and walk through, and delicately bringing up those discussions. Before we end our time today, is there anything around that side of things with end of life that you found to be really just meaningful for families as they're thinking about that time for themselves?
If your parents are reluctant to do a living will and talk about their end of life wishes, much less appointing a healthcare surrogate,
Mm.
Go back to what I said in the beginning, which is make it about you. Mom, Dad, I've been thinking about the importance of knowing your end of life wishes. And as hard as a subject as this is, I started reading about it because my friend is going through this and it's been a really rough situation. So I've decided that I'm doing my own living will.
Mm.
And I want to talk to you about my end of life wishes because my young friend who's in his 40s just passed away in a car accident, or my neighbor down the street, or I mean, you don't have to look far to have a real example. You make it about yourself. I'm doing my living will. As hard as it is, I want to talk to you. Should anything happen, here's a copy of my living will. Here's who I've asked to be my healthcare surrogate, who can make decisions for me if I can't. Have you done your living will? Could we talk about it? I don't want to be guessing. I really want to know what your end of life wishes are. So no matter what, I am not burdened with having to make decisions that I don't even know if there's what you wanted. If I'm your, do you want me to be your healthcare? No, I asked my own son, and you know what he said?
Mm.
Hell no. No, Mom, I cannot be your healthcare surrogate. I could never pull the plug on you.
Mm. Well, and
Plus,
how
he's in California,
right?
like so many people. He's not even close. And they always say, try to, you're asking a healthcare surrogate person who's in your town, close, could be at the hospital.
Yeah.
So you may start with yourself, be compassionate. Your parents might say, "Oh yeah, we did that 10 years ago. I just haven't mentioned it. Here's a copy." Well, is it up to date? Is the person they listed still available? I mean, those are the things some other things people might not think about that I talk about in the book.
Yeah, it's so good. It does. It just makes it so clear. And then one other question is when we look at our younger readers, we also know family caregivers are much younger in age. We've seen the
Yeah.
demographic shift. How do we prepare for ourselves? What can we
Oh
do
gosh.
at a younger age? I know if you had like
Yeah. Oh
one
no,
piece of
I can tell
advice.
you
I
suggestion
know the
number
whole book,
one.
right? But
Well, yeah, that's so
yeah.
hard. Um, I really, I really think I really think that it's paying for long-term care. And as hard as it is to save, and it's such a struggle today for young people, but it really is important. I'm not a fan, and boy, could we have an entire hour conversation about what I'm about to say, Nicole. I
Mm.
no longer recommend traditional long-term care insurance. Let me
Mm.
repeat that.
Mhm.
I no longer recommend your traditional policy where you're paying monthly or annually, and you're not going to need this for 20 years. For many reasons, and they would be huge increases in premiums. I can't recommend that. So what's left? I would tell somebody start a health savings account and commit to putting $20 a month in it and just start young. It could be in your 30s, Nicole, and 40s. And that's untouchable money that's tax-free, that's designated for just your health and long-term care. That's one. Okay. The other thing that I would say is how you take care of yourself physically in your 30s will be how you feel in your 40s, and how you take care of yourself in your 40s and your 50s. You can't say, I'm young, I can neglect my health. Burn the candle at both ends. And that could be caregiving at both ends.
Mhm.
You can't suddenly become a healthy, active senior. It's a habit you've built up all your life, taking care of yourself mentally, physically, and spiritually. And that's really the biggest ball of wax I would give somebody younger, is don't forget that. Youth doesn't last forever. If you're going to give up smoking, give up smoking. If you're going to commit to that exercise program, do it now.
Yeah.
If you're going to do things that you know contribute to your physical, mental, and spiritual well being, don't put it off, because that is going to directly translate into how you age successfully and gracefully. And then being a practical optimist.
I like that. I'm adopting
Realistic optimist.
I'm adopting
Don't
that.
think you won't hit unless we could check the box. Now, this is sort of maybe a little much for your listeners, but if we could all check the box that says, die in my sleep, still in the go-go years at age 90 with 0 long-term care, we do it.
I would absolutely
check that box. Yeah, I got it all planned, Star. I checked that box.
We'll just manifest that, right?
So, be thinking about your support team. Listen, a few years ago, I fired my doctor and my financial planner and my CPA. Why? They were all in their 70s, and I knew they'd be retiring by the time I need them.
Right.
I'm in my 70s and 80s. And I had that experience. My stepfather said, "Oh, don't worry, Star, I have a will. Here's my attorney's name." Guess what? His attorney had passed away, closed his office.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It was a disaster. I could never find the will.
Right.
And I thought it was all taken care of. That's not enough to ask. Do you have a will? I don't need to see it, Mom, Dad, but I just want to know. This is not the first question you ask.
Right. Is your attorney still alive? No.
No, correct. But I didn't say, well, do you have a copy? And could you at least tell me where it is? If something should happen. Or could I have a copy in a sealed envelope? Or could I have the name and number? Could I introduce myself to your professional team?
Right.
But for me, I realized they're not going to be there. I could see what happened when they're not. So I went out and I found people in their 40s. So when I'm like,
I like that advice. Where can people connect with you, work with you, learn more from you? Where can we direct them?
Okay, well, my website is www.starbradbury, one R, STARBradbury.com. I have lots of information on my website about either a one-on-one consulting. And believe me, if I am not the right person for a variety of reasons, I'll tell you that. And I would refund your money happily. So I do one-on-one consulting. And again, it could be with family, an older couple themselves trying to make a good plan, or with adult children who need help and guidance and information. So there's no limit on that side. I'm also available to do presentations about my book or on subjects about senior living and life care communities and life care contracts. And so that's all on my website. But the most important thing is I have a resources tab on my website that include questions you should ask when touring any kind of senior community, whether it's assisted living, whether it's skilled nursing, whether it's a life care community. And those are free. And I put them up there so they would be free. And even though a lot of that is in the book, it's a way to print them out and take them with you if you're trying to hire home care. What should I ask? Home health care. I don't know what to ask. That is on my website.
Oh, so helpful.
That's the best way to reach out to me. And there's a contact tab so people can say, come and talk to my group or.
Oh, good. It's so good. And we'll have those links on the show notes for the episode description. So
thank you so much, Nicole.
Have it all available. Thank you so much. I know it's like we could talk for a long time. This was so enjoyable.
We covered a lot.
Yes, we did. We did. And it's been a joy. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I appreciate it.
Well, let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.